And with that diagnosis, after some treatment, I actually received an expiration date. And when someone at the Mayo Clinic gives you an expiration date, you believe them. There was just this knowing that I needed to go on a different journey than I had been on. And it was long, and it was dark, and it was lonely. And yet today, I know who I am and what I am and why I'm here. And the fact that it doesn't look anything like I would outline says to me that that's God at work. That is me getting to be, as the scriptural texts tell us, the witness to the goodness that is.
Welcome to another episode of The Rooted Founder. I'm especially excited about this episode. We just had a fabulous pre-recording conversation, and I can't wait to dive into more details with this guest. We can call her AmiLynne. I think everyone calls her Babs, and she has had a very well-viewed TED Talk, has written a book, and has achieved a lot in what would be considered societal norms. And she's also gone on an inner journey to heal some of herself and integrate some of herself so she can be more aligned in more of what she creates. So Babs, I'm super excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm excited too, Staci. I'm looking forward to what the next hour opens up for us in conversation and sharing.
So to give the audience kind of a framing of who you are and what your backstory is and how you achieve certain levels in materialistic world view, if you will, and then what the journey was like for you to integrate into more alignment. How did that evolve for you?
Well, it's a really great question. And for so many, all of us, not just so many, but all of us, is that we think of life in reaching certain milestones. And so one of the things I'm going to do as we talk today is share with you some of the different words that I'm using because they feel more authentic to me. So while we talk about like the material world, for me, I call that it's the practical world. The practical world. It's the engagement with my fellow, brothers and sisters out there just trying to do the best that they can. And I grew up in a world where my father shared and instilled the importance of always being the best and always striving to be the best. I did grow up in an environment where second place was first loser and was not, celebrated at all. Quite the contrary. If it's not an A, it's an F. And I do mean that. An A- was not acceptable. So perfection, that human perfection, was something that from a small child, I learned to strive for because it was my responsibility to be perfect. And so I did all of those things that so many people do. You matriculate through high school and college, and I was a Mensa member as a teenager. So always those accolades, the forward-facing, societal-facing agenda was being met at every turn. And I moved into the corporate world, into sales. I was the youngest, I was a senior VP in sales, and I was the youngest in my company in a financial services industry, ran half of the country, and went from the worst producing to the best producing offices in the, so I did what I was called to do. And that calling was to be the best at every turn. And I married an amazing man who my then goal in life, in addition to being successful in the business world, was also to be a proper wife. And it was really about that time that my world began to take a turn. And looking back, I can say, oh, it was like a left turn. But the reality of it is I wasn't aware. I wasn't awake to my own being, my own purpose, my own calling. So I struggled for a number of years as that transition began to really present itself. So after my first husband and I married, just 2 months after we were married, he was killed by a drunk driver. And so I had done everything I was supposed to do, right? Like, I've got a good career. I had graduated college in less time than, is expected. I had met this amazing man. We had paid for our wedding up front. There was no debt, gone on our honeymoon, came home, and literally we're having a housewarming party. We had moved into a new home, and 4:00 in the afternoon, you get that knock on the door. And so as I look back, I can see that that was kind of the first knock of spirituality saying, hey, AmiLynne, there's more to this life experience than what you're striving for and what you're achieving. And so again, in that moment, I just thought, as I had been raised to believe, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. So I was it was my lot in life. Shortly thereafter, I received my first cancer diagnosis. I was running the Leukemia Foundation Marathon in Maui and went for a physical beforehand. And I get this news back from the doctor, and she says, we need to get you in for a biopsy. I was like, okay, I'll do the things I'm supposed to do, but I don't want to hear about it until I get back from my marathon. And so again, the universe was calling me to attention, but I was still really wrapped up in doing the right things and doing what was expected of me. So went through chemo, radiation. I had a radical mastectomy, reconstructive surgery at 23 years old. So I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. Begin to matriculate beyond that into a new marriage, continuing in this financial services industry that I had begun to set up and excelling in that space, and a failed marriage. And that failed marriage, in my opinion, was that next knock on the door of just the universe, of God, source creator, saying, AmiLynne, there is more here. Fast forward a decade, because we only have so much time. I received a second cancer diagnosis. And with that diagnosis, after some treatment, I actually received an expiration date. And when someone at the Mayo Clinic gives you an expiration date, you believe them. So I did what everybody does, and I went home and I cried for a couple of days, because we're human beings and that's harsh news to receive. But then I woke up on that third morning, and from a place beyond a space that I could recognize at the time, there was just this knowing that I needed to go on a different journey than I had been on. And that journey required of me to question every belief that I had ever held to. And it was hard, and it was long, and it was dark, and it was lonely. And yet today, some 20 years later, not only have I obliterated that expiration date, but I know who I am and what I am and why I'm here. And the fact that it doesn't look anything like I would outline says to me that that's God at work. That is me getting to be, as the scriptural texts tell us, the witness to the goodness that is. So, I mean, that's just kind of a capsulation of, look, my life is no different than anyone else's. The challenges we face may take on a different demeanor, a different appearance, but we're all faced with these life challenges along the way. And I wish I had known then what I know now, that each of those challenges is really a knock on the door. It's an invitation. It's an opening. It's a frontier being offered, not a limiting or a punishment. God is not punitive. The universe is not punitive with us. God is always conspiring to our good. And so that's opened up an opportunity for me to really dig deep and explore not some people call them the big questions in life, like who am I and why am I here? And as we talk a little bit further today, I'm sure you're understand better that one of the things I learned along the way is that part of the reason we aren't satisfied with the answers for those big questions is because we're asking the wrong questions.
Mhm.
And so we get to engage in this life that we have been given. We get to look for the face of God in the midst of a storm. We get to acknowledge the light in the presence of darkness. And we get to do each of those because we're still here.
Mhm.
For the record, it doesn't make it any easier, but I can tell you that moving through those, as opposed to trying to move around or being paralyzed by the fear of facing them, moving through those allow us to then have a sense of peace and fulfillment, even in the midst of this worldly experience that we're having.
Mhm. Oh, there's so much to unpack here. So first, I feel like to anchor this for folks listening, I think we go through life, and I've had this experience in my life. We go through life and we set these targets. I'm going to climb the corporate ladder. I'm going to climb the capitalism ladder. I'm going to achieve I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to be a wife. I'm going to be a mother. I'm going to be a husband, a father, a provider. We have these roles that we want to stamp our mountains, climb and stamp our flags there and say, we've earned this. We've done this. And along that path, we inevitably encounter obstacles. So we can have a health crisis, we can have a financial crisis, we can have a relationship crisis, and that creates a internal crisis that is like, if how I'm operating is producing this in my life, how do I need to adjust? And I consider those our enough is enough moments. And you're calling them the little knock on the door.
Yep.
And we can get them in small doses, and then we can get them in catastrophic doses. And I think when we first start encountering them on our life path, we can say, oh, I am doing something wrong, and so I will change. Or we can say, maybe I'm being redirected in some way. And how can I be open to the evolution of maybe my life isn't going to look how I thought it was going to look. It's going to look different. And how can I embrace that journey while also in some ways having guardrails? How did you do that in your life? Because we're kind of blending this. I want to be in control. I want to dictate my future. I want to power through. And then there's this other part of us that is aware that we can't control everything, that there are circumstances and ethereal things that happen that we are not in control of. And so how do you integrate those and still be a productive, quote unquote, productive human being?
Right. Right. Oh, what a great question. And I'm going to take us back a couple of years. Prior to meeting my current husband, who has been my savior in so many ways, and I don't say that lightly. I wasn't big on watching television or even movies. I'd only been to one movie in a movie theater until I was 35 years old, and so for me, this has significance because while that wasn't something I'd grown up with, it was something I was introduced to as an adult. And so embracing that space of being entertained by the screen actually led me to that one of the most compelling lessons in my own experience that I was able to take from the quote unquote big screen and bring it into my life. And that was a couple of years back, Apollo 13, the movie, and it was a remake where they actually used audio that was captured while Apollo 13 was in orbit. And so the audio from this movie, they're piping it in, and the scene where I had this little dog whisper, this little aha moment, this little knock on the door, if you will, it's NASA in the command center, the control center. And you see all of these computer monitors. And for every monitor, there's at least one human being, usually white shirt, black pants, black rimmed glasses. We can all picture it. All of them were smoking for whatever reason. And it was so clear to me that I then actually went and did a little bit more research, because the clarity of it was almost startling. And here's what the clarity was, is that each of those monitors, I soon learned, had up to 6 people trained with the information that was being produced or shown or calculated from each of those monitors. Because astronauts are not in orbit for an 8-hour shift. And you've got to cover not only a 24-hour period, but the opportunity for some crisis, some challenge to present itself, as we saw in this movie made from real events. And so this idea of a command center became so important to me, because each person was charged with being the best that they could be, not the best, but the best that they could be at their respective activity, their job, their role, their contribution. And yet they weren't the only one that could meet that need in any given time period. And so it was so clear to me that this idea of being a type A personality, matter of fact, I call myself a recovering AAA personality, because if it wasn't controllable, I didn't engage with it. So this idea of letting up that control, giving it up and letting go of that, which had been so hard for me. I was the queen of multitasking, not. I mean, we call ourselves that, but as you begin to move into this mindset that not only do I have things of value to contribute, and so I want to be the best that I can be at any given moment. And my best in this moment might be different than my best 10 minutes from now, 3 days from now, or 10 days ago. But to show up and be present the best I am able is important to the harmony of the rest of the world. And while I can't control how other people show up, I can be in command of my own space. And that command allows me then to invite others into my experience, where their level of expertise or experience, partnered and coupled with mine, helps me to move forward and move through whatever is showing up in my life, whether it's a challenge or whether it's harmonious or what, good, bad, or indifferent. Those are all labels. But that one, I think we all know that any journey we take is so much better with travel partner. And if I can allow for another's strengths to strengthen my experience, that's not a sign of weakness. It's actually gratitude to the universe, gratitude to God, source, spirit, whatever you call it, because God gave that gift to that individual. And acknowledging where I can use support and help and inviting those individuals to come in actually is an honoring of the whole of creation and the oneness that we all are. So that idea of being in command actually opens us up to a much richer life experience, where control, I think any of us who have ever struggled with this idea of control, life feels very limiting. There's a certain way to do things. There's a certain person or a certain, environment. There is a specificity, and that specificity doesn't open us up to the frontiers that God has laid before us, because we're trying to control something that isn't within the realm of control to begin with. Mm-hmm. But we can show up from a place of command and not only live a more harmonious experience ourselves, even in the midst of chaos, but we're inviting a sense of community by recognizing and honoring the gifts in others and their strengths and bringing those to the table, and lifting them up in recognizing that as well.
I feel like you touched on the isolation crisis that we hear so many people talking about. And then also, I'm going to parallel this to business, because a lot of the people that I support are people who end up trapped in their business. But we're trapped in our business oftentimes because of this control dynamic that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And we struggle to delegate or let go or to empower the people around us because we have a construct in our mind of the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
And we don't allow for the collaboration and the community and the connection, which allows for the evolution of the company or day-to-day operations or more revenue or more clients or more members or more investors. And so we stifle it because we want to control it. And this is human nature because you're talking about it just in your own humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can see it played out in business. How does one overcome that dynamic within themselves so they can evolve to be the type of leader that they would need to be inside of their companies and lives that would create stability along with expansion?
Oh, what a great question. And I love this idea of what can we do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Because if what we're doing isn't working, it doesn't make it wrong. It just means it's not working for us in our scenario. And so that, for me, that brings in this idea of borrowed belief. And a borrowed belief to me is something that is a societal expectation that we have accepted. And we've accepted it because I know that we have accepted it in one form, or we know we've accepted a societal expectation because we feel like that there's a goal out there that we are not achieving, but we're not quite sure how to get there. And so this idea of borrowed belief, and borrowed beliefs come from society, they come from our parents, they come from our religious leaders. And I don't want us to mistake a borrowed belief as something that has a nefarious intent. My parents, I grew up in a very rigid Christian household. I was taught predestination. And in that same space, while there were a select few going to heaven, I was already told I wasn't one of them, but that there was a certain way I needed to behave because I was still God's child. That is a foundational conflict that actually carries us through as adults. So this idea of being a business owner or being a manager or managing a household, whatever it is that we feel like we are meant to be successful at, I encourage you, as I encourage myself, to ask the question, what is the belief? And is it mine? Or is it something that I have adopted from someone else? Is it a borrowed belief? Mm-hmm. And we know that they're borrowed. You said something earlier about the idea of kind of a crisis of faith. Mm-hmm. And for me, what I'm recognizing in my own experience is that so often, whether it's myself or others that I'm working with or supporting, that this idea of a crisis of faith is a misunderstanding of our experience. Mm-hmm. Because what we're really having is a crisis of belief. Mm-hmm. And a belief is something that we've adopted or taken on, again, being trained, whether it be in our profession or our personal lives, our spiritual lives, that we've adopted without experiencing. And so when a challenge presents itself where this idea should help us remedy it, but it doesn't, it's not a crisis of faith. It's a crisis of belief because I have adopted a belief that someone shared with me in goodwill, but that I didn't take the time to really examine. What does this belief mean? Because it's when we take a belief and we pull it off the shelf where it's tidily organized, very tidy and organized and color coded and all the things that we do to keep things in structure. When we take it down off the shelf, and we hold it and we look at it and we examine it and we explore and we ask questions, it is in that space that we then begin to experience what that belief is inviting us to experience. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that we believe that all people are good and that I'm only hiring people qualified to do the job that I've hired them for. And then all of a sudden we have this crisis at work because whether it's a small challenge or a big challenge, it's the result of someone who has said that they could do a certain thing, and somehow that's not transpired. Well, that's a societal belief that we are meant to resolve an issue based on one person's acknowledgement of what they can or cannot do. So in that moment of question or crisis, the question gets to be, how do we work through this as opposed to casting blame? Because we're all in this place of borrowed belief. Some of us are more aware of it than others. And it's not our job to tell people that they're in a place of borrowed belief. But if I, as a business owner, a manager, a house manager, president of the PTA, or even a committee member, if I can really look at what it is that's unfolding and see what's true about the experience, forget what my goals were, forget what I had in my mind's eye. What is really transpiring here? And am I the right person to engage in a resolution, in moving forward, in bringing to a conclusion whatever the challenge is? Or do I need to seek out someone where that's their best skill? And that seeking out that person, if we're operating from a place of command versus control, seeking out that person is natural. And it's inviting and it's welcoming because we have the ability to know that our calling is important and we don't have all of the answers. And so it's imperative. It is imperative that we reach out to those individuals. So changing that mindset from, if it's going to be, it's up to me, to, it's kind of like the song from the 60s and 70s, We Are Family. Mm-hmm. And look, we get to create that space. It's an invitation not to admit what we don't know, but to celebrate what someone else knows that could bring value to resolving that itty bitty question or that huge crisis or challenge that's being presented. So that control versus command is so important, but it's also about the importance of recognizing a belief and an expectation versus an experience. And that experience we know is true because we've experienced it. I don't have to believe it because it comes from a place of knowing. So it's unquestionable. And that's the space. If we're operating from that place of knowing and experience versus a place of expectations and goals and agendas, even the biggest challenge in life is going to bring blessings to us that our imagination could never conjure.
Oh, there's so much here again. So one thing is, we hear a lot of entrepreneurs say, I will do whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. And I often say to them, whatever it takes may look very different than what you think whatever it takes looks like. And that is basically what you just explained, because when something happens that it did not go, quote unquote, as planned, we can blame, complain, get frustrated, which we call below the line thinking, or we can get curious. We can get curious. And one of the things that we value as leaders, household managers in business is resourcefulness. I think one of the things that everyone says the most is, if you're resourceful, then I want to hire you because I can teach you anything else. What you're really saying when we're saying we want somebody resourceful, we want somebody who's objective. Can they remove themselves from the situation, see all of the pros, cons, good, bad, ugly, breakdowns in the assembly line, and view it from the observer seat in an objective manner so that we can then rally the people, the playbooks, the tools, the technology to come in to help make it more streamlined, operationally efficient, and improve the culture along the way. Now, what you also said was the power of experience. And experience is where we gain wisdom. And experience is something that we have to viscerally do. And so we can't just sit behind a screen or read a book and say we've gained experience. A lot of experience comes from taking insights and applying them and getting that visceral knowing, that inner knowing of like, this works or this doesn't work for me. I see a lot of people struggle with the courage to sit in the observer seat and the courage to admit, I don't know, and celebrate the knowing of someone else. How did you navigate that personally? And how do you help coach people to get out of their control center and into their command center so that they can really make a transformation?
Well, for me, I think it's all about truly recognizing what we're called to be. And for just a moment, I'm going to encourage, as I would myself for you, your listeners, is set aside your title, set aside your role, set aside the labels, just set them aside. And the example I'm going to give you is most of us in 2024 have been on a plane or on a ship, a boat, at least once in our experience. And we put a lot of trust in the pilot. And so we think in that in that small chasm of space, that all of this lies on the shoulders of the pilot or on the captain of a ship. And something that most people fail to realize is that that cockpit at the front of the airplane has more than one person sitting in it. There's a co-pilot who has the same training as the pilot. There's a navigation specialist who has a different type of training than both the pilot and the co-pilot. And so often we think that it's all about our mindset. Well, I am in charge of. And so therefore, if something goes wrong, it reflects poorly on me. If a captain of a ship were to take that mindset and not reach out to those individuals who are in that shared space, whether it's in the cockpit, whether it's at the control tower, at the closest airport, or whatever that support structure might be, that an unwillingness to reach out for that support could be catastrophic, not just for themselves, but for so many others. And that's just like leading a business, leading a sales team, leading a household, is that we take on this sense of responsibility that is misunderstood. One, because it's not ours to shoulder alone to begin with, and never has been. But two, it's a space of that whole idea of I would do anything to save my business, to save my household, is if we are willing to reach out and ask the question, what needs to be done next, of another, what we do is we open up the experience to be something that we might not have imagined. And yes, it's so important to have those people in our lives, whether it's professional or personal. Go back to that idea of a ship's captain. So often, and we've all noticed this if we've seen a movie or whatnot about a ship, navigating the ocean, is that captain is constantly in communication with the navigation specialist, and they're constantly course correcting. Because there is the jet stream, there are storms, there's weather patterns, there are these elements of life that are present beyond our realm of even perceived control. And so this idea that we would chart a course, as they say in Star Trek, and within moments be at our destination without any need to course correct is a misunderstanding of the journey. And no one looks at the captain when, we pull into port and say, oh, you had to course correct so many times. I don't know that I'm ever going to take another cruise in my life. Same idea when we get off of a plane. Oh, there were turbulence. So I'm never getting on a plane again in my life. That course correction is part of the process. And it doesn't mean failure. Matter of fact, the unwillingness to course correct could be catastrophic, could be, the crisis that our imagination, our fear is suggesting. So it's by not reaching out in those areas to bring in someone where that is their area of experience. By not doing that, we could actually be bringing about the result that we fear the most. And again, nobody says that captain or that pilot have failed if they need to course correct, because without that course correction, failure can be inevitable. It's the course correction that allows us to reach a destination and to have an experience greater than we might have had otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I love the captain and the pilot analogy because in business, we call it the visionary and the integrator. The visionary is plotting the course, sees where they're going, they see the front of the puzzle box, and the integrator is the one that is more in the details and can scope and sequence it and map it out. And I also love the parallel of course correction is a part of the process.
Yeah.
It's not a deviation. It's not something wrong. It's part of it. And in business, that's true also. The number of hard problems you solve and the number of obstacles you overcome, the more valuable you become as a visionary business owner, house manager, whatever it is. The human journey side of it. So if we kind of jump into this psychological sandbox of, okay, we understand we have a goal. We understand that we're going to encounter a series of hard problems or obstacles or unexpected things along the way. How do we manage our human through that journey to not get sideswiped emotionally, sideswiped mentally, sideswiped psychologically, where we fall off in such a way that we feel like I am a failure? How do we hold that container along that journey and make it sacred instead of it be a scary journey?
Sure. Well, I think you used an important word for me, and that's container. Mm. And I think that how we engage with our container is instrumental in what our journey looks like. And part of how we engage in that container is how we speak to ourselves, and then ultimately how we speak to others. And there's oftentimes in business, there is an accepted rigidness to the vocabulary that we employ. For example, goals. Well, what are your 5-year goals? What are your 1-year goals? What are your 6, it's all about goals. One of the things that was really helpful to me, not only in seeing progress in my business, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, was to really take a look at how I spoke to myself and the words that I used. For example, I no longer talk about goals because in my upbringing, a goal was black and white. It was success or failure. You achieved it or you didn't. And if you didn't, you failed. And even if you got close is not good enough. What's the phrase? Close doesn't count except in horseshoes and hand grenades. And so often, especially in business, that's the mentality we take. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I did that allowed myself to have some grace and reduced my stress level was I began to work in a place of targets. Because a target, I mean, I bet the moment I said that, many of you envisioned, a bullseye with red in the center, black and white rings around it, whether it's a dartboard or whether it's, a target like on a bale of hay for archery. The idea of target opens our thought in a very different way. And if we take that idea of a target and really understand the premise of target, is that they're on a target. For example, in darts, there are different points awarded based on where the dart lands. And look, you don't always want a bullseye because it may put you over the number of points that you need in order to win a contest, for example. Or in archery, you're looking at obtaining a certain number of points in order to succeed at whatever, game you're playing or whatever competition you may be engaging in. And so this idea of a target, it allows not only for needs to be met, revenue, for example, we need to secure X amount of dollars in revenue. Well, that's an important number to be mindful of. But if we can have a target, that target does a couple of things. The target allows for grace in the event that we didn't hit the target exactly, but we came close. Mm-hmm. And so it allows us to acknowledge the good that is unfolding. It gives us the opportunity then to say, okay, this is where we got. What could we have done differently should we have desired to accomplish more? But this idea of rigidness in the way we speak to ourselves translates into how we speak to others and the type of boss or manager or supervisor or parent that we are perceived as. If we have a rigidness in the way that we speak, it instills a certain personality trait or belief in those that we are leading. And so if we can be a bit softer in the words that we're using, not only do we reduce our own amount of stress, but it actually gives space for those that we desire to lead the opportunity to show up the best they're able and to show up more authentically, because there's not a fear of missing the target. Mm-hmm. The target's wider. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of space for us to show up in that. If we are targeting a behavior, if we're targeting a result or an idea of what success should look like. So in that space, it becomes striving together as a team, which we all know that when we're working towards something as a team, it's a very different environment than if those that we are leading are operating from a place of fear of letting us down, fear of letting themselves down, fear of failure, fear of not hitting the goal. And that doesn't mean that we don't have targets that we need to reach in order to maintain employment or successful relationships. But what it means is it gives us the grace and the grace to those around us to recognize that sometimes we need to course correct. And oftentimes working in a place of target versus goal, the target will tell us where the course corrections are needed, as opposed to, I didn't hit the goal, so now we have to go back and assess everything, which just delays then the forward progress and unfolding because of the rigidness in our thought, the rigidness in our words, the rigidness in how we are showing up and how we are perceived by those that we desire to lead.
Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing and everything you're saying is that it's both. Yes. It's both having something that you're shooting for and the grace container to allow for deviation of overshooting it or undershooting it. And Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, in his book, The Gap and the Gain, he talks about that. Like, you'll have a target and you'll you'll make advancements towards it. And maybe you don't hit it 100%, but you still gained so much and you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
I think you also touched on where we get trapped in performance perfectionism. So having a goal keeps us in that performance perfection trap. And when we can have a target, we can hold the container for grace and truth. So there can be the hard truth of we didn't hit what we were supposed to hit, and we did get close, and these are all the wins that we also achieved. And now we get to course correct and evolve as well. I think the other thing that you pointed out, which was so great, is that we get this opportunity to create a high trust environment for the people that we're looking to collaborate with. And what that does is it doesn't tell somebody that they're doing something wrong or they're making a mistake or they're not good enough. What it is it's creating an environment for them to jump the gap and experience their own awareness or awakening. And we get to do this as leaders. And sometimes we compartmentalize so much business and person, but all business is a group of people working together. It's basically a community. It's a neighborhood. And how would you treat the people in your neighborhood? You would treat them with respect and kindness, and we don't always get it right because life has stresses, and you could be in a massive storm, and you could have been thrown off, and you could have, been bleeding. All these things could happen that make you not the best leader, and there's also a grace for that. But there is the hard truth too. And I think that goes to your highest values, or one of your highest values, which is authenticity.
Oh, absolutely.
You want to speak to how you incorporate that?
Well, I have an exceptional example. As a young sales manager in the financial services world, I was given a quota. In business, we're very attuned to that idea of a quota. And as a sales manager, I mean, when it's you, it's one thing. When you're leading a team, and so whether it's a manager in a sales, whether it's a committee leader, a committee chair looking to accomplish certain tasks or activities, at first, well, okay, here's our quota. You divide it by the number of your salespeople, and then there's their quota. And I failed miserably. And it was really, really hard because I don't fail. Like that it was unacceptable. And it was more that failure felt heavier because I felt like my failure was impacting these people's lives. And that oftentimes as a manager, as a supervisor, as a business owner, not only do we have our own needs that we are taking into consideration, but we recognize that each of those people working for us, with us on our team, their livelihoods, their families, their children, etc., are impacted. And at the time, I didn't recognize exactly what I was doing. Hindsight is wonderful. But after 2 months of not even meeting our quota, I was like, okay, this isn't working. And so what I did was I went to each of my salespeople and we had a one-on-one meeting. And I said, normally this is the meeting where I would tell you what your quota is. But today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what you need. And those questions, for example, for me in that environment were, what do you need to cover your monthly bills? What do you need and to cover entertainment, to have a good work-life balance? What do you need to prepare for your family's future? Do you have children? College funds, those types of things. And at the end of each of those sit-down one-on-one meetings, each individual had created their own quota. And I can tell you that the end of that exercise, the very first time, that quota so far exceeded what the office quota had been set by corporate that we never missed quota again. And we became the most productive sales team in the company. And it wasn't by me dictating. It was by me asking, What do you need? And here's the thing. I was floored at how many people didn't know the answers to those questions. And so it was an amazing exercise in helping them learn life skills too. I didn't couch it that way. In the moment, I don't know that I recognized it, but I was floored that they didn't know what they needed on a monthly basis. Well, I need $80,000 a year, or I need $200,000 a year. I'm like, but what is that makeup? And it became personal for them. And they began to realize that I cared. And I didn't care from a place of meeting the office quota, because from that month forward, they never knew what the office quota was. It was inconsequential to me. And so therefore inconsequential to them, because if they were working for their families, we were blowing the office quota out of the water. Mm-hmm. And in that space, the other thing that it did also is it allowed my team to feel seen. It allowed for them to feel like they were contributing to something bigger. And on days in previous to that they might not have shown up or shown up fully, they were engaged because they were showing up for themselves. They were showing up for their family. And I was blessed to have been the person to invite them to do that. And so it's that grace again. Mm-hmm. And it's bringing those team members in at whatever level of contribution they are and letting them know that I value you. And I want what we're doing here to bring value to your family. So it's whether it's a sales quota or whether it's broader conversations of how can I, as a CEO, a manager, a house manager, how can I support what you want in life? Make it about them.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Zig Ziglar's quote, if you help enough other people get what they want, you'll get everything that you want.
Absolutely. And so much more. Mm-hmm. So much more. And pulling that into now that spiritual coaching space, that spiritual travel partner, mm-hmm. is we afford people the opportunity to recognize that life is bigger than borrowed beliefs and expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they begin to have a sense of personal fulfillment, of personal happiness, because they're searching for that in their own experience. Mm-hmm. They're exploring that and discovering that for themselves versus a task at work that meets the expectations of someone else. Mm-hmm.
I have a dear friend who has passed away, family member, actually, I guess you could consider in some way. He used to say, you can do good and you can do well. Yeah. And that's really what we're saying here. And one of the things that I think is often overlooked in business, in work in general, is just the importance of culture. And culture, that word gets overused. But really what we're saying is be human. Help people evolve as their best selves inside of the container of whatever it is that you're working on. And you will create a strong culture of people who want to be resourceful, who want to hit the target or exceed the target. And it will come naturally instead of it being a stick motivation. It is just an environment that naturally cultivates it. So for, in summary, asking a few closing out questions, how would you define success?
I think it's a great question, Staci. And I think that my definition of success should not matter to anyone but me. Because success outwardly expressed oftentimes involves the agenda and expectations of society. Mm. And for me, success shifts from moment to moment and day to day. As someone who's now a quadriplegic, success is very, very different than it was just 2 years ago. Someone who's now not in the corporate world, success is very different. Mm. And so for me, I think success comes back to that key word that you pointed out earlier. is if I can show up as authentically as I'm able in any given moment of any given day, the metrics are things that others are judging me by. A sense of peace and fulfillment, even in the midst of a chaotic moment or season in life. A sense of peace and fulfillment probably is as close as I'm going to get to the idea of success, because success to me is very ego. Harmony, peace, that to me is what we're called to.
I love that. My definition of success is inner congruence. And I feel like that's what you just said in a roundabout way. It's about alignment and being so personally in tune with your inner knowing and your divine knowing and living out that way to the best you can in every moment.
And that includes allowing other people the same grace to live in that congruency. I love that idea. What was your phrase again? Inner congruence. I may have to borrow that occasionally.
You can.
I love it.
What projects are you most excited about right now?
I have some amazing opportunities. I've got some speaking engagements coming up. And so, I'm really, the big thing that I'm working on right now is expansion. Expanding my idea of how I can support others and expanding the safe space, creating a safe space for people to ask hard questions. And so when I think about projects, to me, Einstein said, I want to know the thoughts of God. Everything else is just a detail. And so those projects, while they're important, what I really want to focus on is creating that space where people can be reintroduced to who they've been all along, but just simply forgot along the way. And I think part of that question is, if people are looking to make a connection, feel free to reach out. I actually have something on my website that most people don't, and that's a voicemail button. You literally can leave me a voicemail, because sometimes writing things out or sending them in a contact form just feels so impersonal. And it's hard to write some of these things sometimes. And so if the one thing that I'm really working on right now is it's continuing to create that safe space where people feel heard, people feel safe to be seen for who they are, warts and all. Warts are beautiful. Scars are amazing. Wounds tell us that we have been in battle and lived through it. And so reach out to me. There's a book, there's projects, there's all kinds of stuff on my website. And yet none of that is important. What's important is if you are looking for a place to simply be you, reach out in whatever forum feels comfortable for you. And my commitment to you is I will be as present for you as I would be for me.
It has been such a pleasure having this conversation with you. I can see the wisdom that you've earned through all of your wounds and all of your scars and all of your inner wrestling, your butterfly transformation. And I honor you for that, because once we get to that seat of the observer and really embrace our calling, we start to see the world through a very different lens.
Yes.
And
we get to see the world through the universe's lens and not our own. And it's so much more vast and welcoming and exciting. Thank you.
It is. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. I hope this will not only inspire you to become more aligned and more inner congruent, it will also empower you to create safe environments for yourself, for your employees, for your team members, and really inside of your home, so that we can restore dinner tables and have tough conversations with grace and truth. So thank you all for tuning in, and feel free to connect with Babs and me if we could support you along your journey. Cheers, y'all.